Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. All right. So welcome to our virtual Speaking of Nature series. My name is Ali Esposito, and I'm the Conservation Education Outreach Coordinator at Mueller. And Mueller Field Station is part of Finger Lakes Community College, and the field station is located at the south end of Honeyway Lake. So here at Mueller, we have a lot of different conservation education programs that happen. We have a K through 12 program. We have college conservation students from FLCC take a bunch of different college courses here. And then we have community outreach events such as the Speaking of Nature series. And then when in-person activities start rolling back around, we go canoeing and we go on nature hikes and stuff like that. So I hope one day you'll be able to join us here. Just a little bit of an update on our next Speaking of Nature. So that's going to be on Tuesday, April 20th at 6 p.m. And it is going to be a presentation from the Finger Lakes Prism. Matthew Gallo is going to be talking to us about the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive species who we're kind of nervous about. We don't know how much it's going to affect our agricultural land and vineyards. So if you're interested in that, just find us on Facebook for an event and you can find the link there to register. We also just recommend that you follow us and like us on Facebook. That would be great. And moving on to our presentation for tonight. So Emilly Nolan is joining us. And she's a wildlife biologist from Buffalo, New York. And she recently completed her graduate research at the Tennessee State University. And she studied Eastern Hellbenders, which are these large, amazing salamanders. And the Hellbender population is declining. And Emily's going to talk to us more about why that is and the efforts that people are taking to conserve these populations. So thank you very much, Emily, for being here. I really appreciate
thank you so
it.
much. Yeah,
no problem. Before I hand it over to you, we'll take questions at the end, and I think that's it. So whenever you're ready.
Cool. All right, let me just share my screen here. Okay. All right, so thank you, Ali, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak with everyone tonight. And thanks to anyone who is tuning in. So yeah, like Ali said, my name is Emilly Nolan. My pronouns are she, her. And today I'm going to talk to you about what I think is one of the coolest salamanders out there, the Hellbender. So I'll be talking about some just kind of general cool facts about them and then some other research that our labs at Tennessee State University to help conserve them. So just a little bit about myself before we get started, kind of why I'm the person giving you this talk. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York, just a few hours away, and got my Bachelor of Science from SUNY ESF in 2016, also just a couple hours away in Syracuse, New York. After undergrad, I worked mostly with endangered frogs in the Sierra Nevadas, and then here in New York for the DEC with fish for a little bit, and then decided to go back to school to get my Master of Science. So I went to Tennessee State University in Nashville, and that's where I did my research on Hellbenders. We just finished up our project last year, so I'm excited to talk to you guys about that. And then please, if you have any questions on how you kind of get into the STEM field or this kind of wildlife work, I'd love to talk to you guys more about it after the presentation. So I'll put my email up at the end for that. So the first thing you're probably asking is, what the heck is a hellbender? Well, hellbenders are a type of giant salamander. In fact, they are North America's largest salamander species, and they can reach over 2 feet long in some cases. You can kind of judge their size from this picture of a hellbender in this person's hand here. They are quite large, and most people are pretty shocked to find out that these huge salamanders actually exist. Personally, I think they're really cute, but I know I don't share that opinion with a lot of other people. Also, I just kind of want to point out that not all these pictures are my own, and I've tried to credit whoever's they are if I could find the source online for it. Hellbenders are part of the giant salamander family. They are one of 3 species in this group and the only one found in North America. The other 2 are the Japanese giant salamander, which can reach 4.5 feet in length, found only in Japan, and the Chinese giant salamander, which can reach 6 feet in length, and that's found in China. So yeah, again, these salamanders are really big. Personally, I can't imagine just being in a stream over there and seeing one that big next to you in the wild. It's just so crazy to me. Some of you might also ask, what's a salamander? What group of animals do they belong to? So salamanders are a type of amphibian that typically have smooth, moist skin, a long tail, and they walk on four legs, which differentiates them from other amphibians like toads or frogs. So they are amphibians, they're not reptiles, they're not lizards. Salamanders can live on land and be more terrestrial. So an example of this that you all might be familiar with is the Eastern newt, which is that picture on the left there. Or they can be more aquatic and spend their time in the water like a hellbender does. One other thing I have to talk about right away is all the funny and kind of neat nicknames that hellbenders have. You might hear them referred to as snot otters, devil dogs, water lizards, then my personal favorite is lasagna sides. So most of these have something to do with their physical appearance, which I'll kind of relate back to coming up. And along the lines of names, no one really knows for certain why they are named hellbenders. It's thought that some of the first people to see them might have thought they looked like they were bent out of hell. I don't really know what that means, but I guess that just kind of stuck and that's their name. Hellbenders are fully aquatic salamanders, so they spend their entire life in the water. The scientific name for the genus of hellbenders is Cryptobranchus, which loosely translates to hidden lung. This is because these animals rely almost completely on their skin for respiration. Even though they do still have lungs, though they mostly use that for buoyancy, mostly relying completely on their skin to breathe. So one of the other nicknames I mentioned earlier might start to kind of make sense. If you look at the sides of the hellbender, you'll see all this kind of weird, loose, flappy skin that kind of folds up and can look like a lasagna noodle. The purpose of these skin folds is to increase surface area on their body so that they have more area to increase respiration. If you look really closely at the rest of their body, really on their back, you might see all these tiny little holes or pores, and that's where they get their other great nickname, the snot otter. So sometimes when you're handling or catching a hellbender, which you only do if you're with a researcher for research purposes, but these pores kind of start to enlarge, and the hellbender secretes this snot-like, sticky, kind of boogery substance. So I have a picture of one of our hellbenders here from the project I worked on showing that happening. And this stuff is super sticky. It's really yet to be determined why they actually do this. Some people think that they do it when they're under stress. It might be a way to deter any predators, kind of as a defense mechanism. There are two species of hellbenders found here in the United States, the Eastern Hellbender and the Ozark Hellbender. You might be surprised to find out that we do actually have hellbenders here in New York State, just south in the Allegheny and Susquehanna River watersheds. So the species that we have here, and what I'll be focusing mainly on today, is the Eastern Hellbender. And the Eastern Hellbender's range, so where it is found, spans from southern New York all the way down into northern Georgia and Alabama. And the Ozark Hellbender is only found in a few rivers in Arkansas now. As you can imagine, hellbenders are pretty hard to catch, and there aren't a ton of predators that are successful at catching them and eating them. Their biggest predator as and enemies are going to be animals like otters, who can kind of reach their little hands under rocks in the stream. You might think of hellbenders as kind of this little protein burrito that they can just kind of munch on. But other small mammals like raccoons and maybe minks could get to them. I've heard stories of larger birds like great blue herons kind of swooping down and grabbing them if they're out in the open. But again, their main predators are going to be those otters. However, if a hellbender is successful in evading predators in the wild, they can live a really long time, in some cases over 20 years in the wild, and over 40 and even 50 in captivity, which is really, really long for a salamander if we think about it. We actually got to meet a hellbender at the Nashville Zoo. Her name was Princess. Not only is she just huge, but they've had her in captivity, I think, since like the 70s and 80s. So just always crazy to me how long they can live. So we know what's eating hellbenders, but what do hellbenders eat? Well, their primary food source is crayfish or crawfish, crawdad, depending on where you're from, but they will also eat other aquatic species like small fish and minnows, or even other salamanders if given the chance. They'll basically eat whatever they can get their mouths on. The hellbender's life cycle looks a little something like this, remembering that this whole process takes place underwater because they are fully aquatic salamanders. So typically during late summer months, around August and September, females will lay eggs under these large flat boulders in the stream, and then males will come and fertilize these eggs and stay with them until they hatch. One thing that is super cool about hellbenders is the males will stay with these eggs under the boulder and guard them from other predators or even other hellbenders until these larvae hatch. So sometimes you can even see like scars and bite marks or missing toes from the fights that these male hellbenders get in from guarding these eggs. So all of those traits help hellbenders survive in their environment. And one aspect of hellbender ecology that I really want to talk about today is their habitat and why it's so essential for their survival. These streams and rivers that hellbenders inhabit are critical for their survival, and they can't be found in just any kind of flowing water. They require streams that are clear and cold and have areas of really fast flowing water because this provides them with a high amount of dissolved oxygen, which they need a lot of because remember they use their skin to breathe underwater. Adult hellbenders also require very large boulders to live and hide under, with other kind of large rocks scattered about for them to use as shelter. Juveniles and larvae are a bit different in that they need smaller rocks and kind of pebbles for habitat. So pictured here are actually two different hellbender streams, and you can see the different rock sizes scattered about, especially some pretty big ones that the adults are going to live under. Unfortunately, these streams and hellbender habitat are under a lot of threats from human-caused activities, and as a result, hellbender populations have been drastically declining for the past few decades, with a lot of these historical populations becoming locally extinct, and in many states, hellbenders are listed as endangered or threatened. One of the biggest threats to hellbenders is habitat destruction and habitat fragmentation, and one of the main sources of this comes from water impoundments or dams. So when a dam is built, it not only destroys the aquatic habitat where it's built, but it floods the entire area upstream and creates a big giant reservoir. The water behind this dam is usually not flowing or moving, so there's not a lot of dissolved oxygen. It tends to get pretty warm, and so hellbenders can't survive there. Dams also directly fragment the stream into very small sections, and this prevents hellbenders from moving up and downstream to find other hellbenders to breed with and confines them to a small section of the stream, which might not have enough suitable habitat, enough suitable breeding habitat, or even enough individuals to breed with, and so we see populations start to decline. Not to mention all the other horrible impacts of dams, including displacement of a lot of indigenous communities. Another threat to hellbenders related to habitat destruction is roads and development. This can be either from constructing roads right over streams or any form of road and development that's adjacent to hellbender habitat. So I mentioned earlier how hellbenders rely on the space underneath rocks to use to live in. We refer to those as interstitial spaces. So the forests, the trees, and all the plants around the streams form what's called a riparian buffer, which prevents a lot of that pollution and debris from getting into those spaces and entering the water. However, when you remove this buffer during construction, all of that dirt or salt, whatever, kind of gets washed right into the stream. This is really bad on those dirt roads that you can see right in forests where all of those dust and fine particles get stirred up and ends up in the water. And this causes really bad siltation in the streams. So we go from these really clear, beautiful streams to this kind of muddy, murky water. This is bad for hellbenders because all that extra dirt gets trapped underneath those boulders and the rocks they use, and they have nowhere to shelter or breed or live. So one last threat that I really want to talk about that has to do with habitat destruction is stacking rocks. Now I'm sure many of you have seen pictures like this or have maybe even done it yourself and not known the effects it has not only on hellbenders but other aquatic species as well. So I know, like I've said a lot, but this habitat is really important. These rocks are really important for hellbenders. And when you move the rocks and these streams in any way, especially so like these rock sculptures or cairns they're called are created, you're directly destroying their habitat and taking away those rocks from the hellbenders. Not to mention all the other little critters that live there, like other salamanders, other fish, and aquatic invertebrates. So next time you see someone doing this or get the urge to do it yourself, remember the hellbenders and please stop stacking rocks. So I'm just going to play a little video for you guys, so hopefully that will drive this point home.
Hi, I'm Nick Bergmeyer, Extension Wildlife Specialist with Purdue Forestry Natural Resources. And welcome to another Moment in the Wild at Purdue University. So today I want to introduce you guys to the issue of rock stacking. So the first thing you guys might ask yourself is how can rock stacking possibly be a problem? When I primarily worked with the Eastern Hellbender, and the Eastern Hellbender is a giant aquatic salamander. It never comes out of the rivers and streams. And from the moment it's an egg to when it's a full-grown adult, they live their entire lives under rocks in the stream. So there's really two issues with the rock stacks as far as hellbenders and other aquatic wildlife are concerned. The first is that when you move rocks around in the stream, you really run the risk of hurting the hellbenders. We've got multiple reports from state parks where they find just dead hellbenders floating downstream, and it's pretty obvious that they've had a crushing injury. And these are usually the adults and the juveniles that they find, but it's really the larvae that are especially at risk from this, and they're small, and so you never really see those when you rescue them. So that's the first issue. And the second issue is that in areas where this is especially common, you're really removing that habitat from the stream. So the Hellbenders depend on these rocks. They spend their whole day under them before they come out at night to look for food. And so you're really removing these rocks and removing places for them to hide. And this is especially an issue with the adults, because if you move the big rocks, usually the rocks you put at the base, those are potential nest rocks for adults. And once you pull those out, even if you put them back, they tend to not use them anymore. It's actually a practice that used to be that biologists would go out in the stream and they would put rocks to look for Hellbenders to get population studies. But they've since realized that moving those rocks around, even if you put them right back, the Hellbenders stop using them. So biologists have stopped using that as a surveying method. So it's really important not to move these rocks around. And so what we really just ask of you guys is if you're playing in the river or stream, in a state park, anywhere where you know there might be Hellbenders, or even if there aren't Hellbenders, we ask that you maybe don't make the rock stacks, or you don't make a tunnel up and down the stream. That way you leave those rocks for the wildlife. And that's really it for this Moment in the Wild segment. If you guys have...
All right, so yeah, just don't stack the rocks. So one other threat to Hellbenders and amphibians in general that I want to talk about, and was part of my research in Tennessee, is disease. So just like humans and other animals, amphibians are susceptible to a number of diseases. The big one that I want to focus on today is called chytridiomycosis, or I'll just call it chytrid for short. Now, chytrid is caused by an aquatic fungus known as Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis, or I'm going to call that again BD for short. This aquatic fungus was originally native to Asia, but largely due to the amphibian pet trade, it's spread all over the globe, and it's now found on every continent besides Antarctica. So this single fungus has caused at least 90 species of amphibians to go extinct, and is responsible for causing the decline of another 500 species. So that's really a lot. And this chytrid fungus infects the skin of amphibians, and it can cause things like lethargy, a loss of riding reflexes, and increased skin shedding. Because amphibians use their skin to breathe and they use their skin for a lot of other functions, it really hinders their ability to kind of go about their daily life. And ultimately, if the infection gets to a certain point, the individual will die. Hellbenders can get infected with this fungus and they can die from chytrid, but they aren't really seeing massive declines from it like a lot of other species are. However, it's still really important to study this disease in Hellbenders so that we can monitor populations in case a bad outbreak happens. We can also use Hellbenders and study different parts of their immune system to see why it is that they can persist with this fungus while other species can't, and kind of use them as a model system. Now, these pictures here actually are showing a Hellbender that's infected with chytrid. So you can see a lot of that skin shedding that's happening, and then they're actually pretty discolored as well for a Hellbender. So this is where I kind of want to talk more about some of the research that our lab did at Tennessee State and how we are trying to help save some of these Hellbender populations. I know it might not maybe seem relevant because most of y'all are probably tuning in from New York, but studies like this are happening all over the Hellbenders range. So just a good example of conservation for Hellbenders across its range. So much like a lot of other states, Hellbenders in Tennessee are rapidly declining, and they are listed as state endangered. Now this large map here shows Tennessee, and all those green areas are the public land. So it's going to be either a national park or a national forest, some kind of area that's protected. The purple squares indicate historical Hellbender populations that have not had any confirmed sightings since 2000. So likely these populations are locally extinct. Orange represents populations where only adults have been documented since 2001. And so those are likely going to be populations where there's just older adults, they're not breeding, and so something's going on there. We're not seeing any recruitment. And then red represents populations where all age classes have been found. So adults, larvae, and juveniles. So those are going to be your healthier populations where there is breeding happening. But as you can see, there's not many of those red populations left across the state. And those that are left remain in those kind of pockets of those protected areas. So in order to hopefully restore and bring back some of those declining Hellbender populations, we conducted what is called a wildlife translocation. A wildlife translocation is formally defined as a deliberate movement of organisms from one site to release in another. So basically you're taking animals from one population and moving them to another area where that population is declining or it's gone. so you can hopefully restore it to some degree, maybe bring it back. So a very recent example of this that just happened, they reintroduced Tasmanian devils into Australia after 3,000 years of them not being there. Just another really cool and recent example of this happening as well. But back to Hellbenders, this has been done with Hellbenders before, but mostly other researchers have used captive reared Hellbenders, so they have been raised in zoos and then released them into the wild. Ours was different in that we used wild Hellbenders, so Hellbenders that have lived their whole life in the wild. This is kind of shown nicely on this diagram on the right here. For wild translocations, you need a source population, and then you move these animals to the translocation site. And hopefully they survive there, and ultimately the goal is that they breed and bring back that declining population. One thing that is critical if you're conducting a wild-to-wild translocation is that you need to use a source population that is healthy, it's not showing any signs of declining, and where the current population is still breeding. And this ensures that if you take a few for the translocation, that you won't be negatively affecting that source population. So I just want to make it very clear that we're not taking every single Hellbender from these source populations. We're just taking a few individuals and moving them to a new site. So for this Hellbender translocation, we use 2 streams to serve as source populations, and I'll be calling those source streams 1 and 2. And they're actually pictured right here, so you have a better idea of what these streams actually looked like. And another thing that was unique about our study is that we wanted to monitor the Hellbenders in these source streams for 1 year before translocating them. This allows us to better study their movements, their specific habitat, and their survival, so we can not only pick appropriate spots in the translocation streams to release them, but we can compare what they do at their source streams to their release sites to see how they adjust to a new environment. We also had to pick streams to translocate them to, and these weren't just any old streams that we picked off of a map. Because the point of a translocation is to restore declining populations, we chose streams that historically contained Hellbenders, but due to reasons like habitat destruction or fragmentation, the population there is either totally extirpated or there are only a few individuals left. And those I'll be calling translocation streams 1 and 2. And they're also pictured right here. So as you can see, we did try to pick translocation streams that looked as similar as possible to their source streams. So before we translocate them, we obviously have to go to the source streams and find some Hellbenders. Hellbender surveys might look a little different than you'd expect. You actually have to put on a full wetsuit and snorkel and goggles because these streams are really, really cold and Hellbenders live underwater, so you need snorkel gear to actually see and catch them. We also carry these large poles around called log PVs, and this helps us lift up the large rocks Hellbenders live under. So it's just kind of a funny picture of all of us suited up to go before surveys. So in these source streams, once we caught a Hellbender, there's a few things that we do right away. We would carry it on shore, usually in a mesh bag or a pillowcase, to a little sampling station that we had set up so we could take some measurements and do some sampling. So first we keep the Hellbender in its bag. We use a spring scale to take its weight. And then we use what is called a bender board to measure how long the Hellbender is. And you can kind of see that in the middle picture right there. It's like a PVC pipe that's cut in half so we can measure the length of the Hellbender. And these measurements help us see how the Hellbender is growing throughout the study. And then from there, because I was interested in studying how that chytrid fungus affects Hellbender health during translocations, I would take a cotton swab and rub it all over the Hellbender body to collect samples of the fungus if it was there. Then one of the most important parts of the project happened. So remembering back to what I talked about earlier, we wanted to study these Hellbenders in these source streams for 1 year prior to translocating them. So in order to do that, we have to put a radio transmitter inside the Hellbender, which looks like that bottom left picture. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about what that does in the next slide. So to get them inside a Hellbender, we would actually put them under anesthesia. We had a veterinarian, Dr. Hardman, and she would surgically implant the transmitter into their body cavity. And then each Hellbender also got a PID tag, which is that upper right picture, so that the PID tags actually have a specific number on them so that you know which Hellbender that you have when you scan it. So after the surgery was completed, we would wait for the Hellbender to wake up and then release it back where we found it still in that source stream. And this whole process took around 2 to 3 hours from the time we caught an animal to the time it was released. So putting these radio transmitters inside the Hellbenders is important because it allowed us to track each animal to the exact rock it was using as shelter. This is called radio telemetry. That little transmitter inside the Hellbender gives off a specific frequency that we can pick up on. So what that looks like is one person holding this pretty large antenna that's connected to a receiver box that's tuned into the frequency of that transmitter inside the Hellbender. And it kind of starts beeping louder and louder once you get closer to where the animal is. So you can see a picture of me and my lab mate Brad here holding the antenna, and receiver and trying to find exactly where that Hellbender is in the stream. Also on this picture, you'll see him holding what looks like a metal detector, and that's actually the pit tag reader that we use. We can scan the rock to determine for sure that the animal is there and know exactly which one that it is. And we got like a lot of weird looks and questions from people driving by who have no idea what we're doing in the stream holding antennas. But in total, we put transmitters in 10 Hellbenders in source stream 1 and 17 Hellbenders in source stream 2, and we tracked and monitored them in these source streams for 1 whole year before we translocated them. So before I move on, I'm going to talk about the survival results from this first year of tracking. So unfortunately, we did not have 100% survival in our Hellbenders in that first year pre-translocation. But that can be expected with any wildlife study. Natural things happen and you can't prevent every animal from dying. So this one pictured there is still live, just another Hellbender picture. But we had a couple of Hellbenders eaten by otters, or so we assume. So we did see a couple at one of our source streams. A couple where we just couldn't pick up on that transmitter signal. So either the Hellbender moved out of range or the transmitter died or the Hellbender got eaten. We don't know what happened to it. We also had one Hellbender in source stream 1 die in a major flooding event. We tracked it to this big brush pile and we couldn't recover the body or the receiver. Now what was really unfortunate was the fate of one of our largest females in the study. I'm going to warn you guys, I'm going to show a pretty graphic picture here. So if you're queasy, you might want to look away, but I'll show it now. So we went to go find this female. We actually found her on land in a brush pile with a rather large stab wound in her head. So what we think happened is that someone was in the stream fishing or moving rocks around and spotted our Hellbender, stabbed her in the head, and then threw her on shore. So unfortunately, Hellbenders can have a pretty bad reputation in some areas, all based on myths and incorrect knowledge that they're venomous, that they compete with native fish, but these just aren't true. Don't get me wrong, if you're sticking your hand or fingers near Hellbender's mouth, it's probably going to bite down on it, but just to avoid that, don't do it. But the craziest part is that this Hellbender was still alive when we found her. She was definitely a fighter. We tried to give her some antibiotics and ointment, and we tried to bring her back, but unfortunately she did succumb to her injuries. So this just highlights how important education is when it comes to wildlife, especially for species that in general people might be afraid of or just don't know enough about. Okay, so that was the survival the first year, which did affect the translocation because we couldn't move as many animals as we wanted to. But again, that's just how these things go sometimes. So let's move on to the actual process of the translocation. Before we translocated them, we obviously had to track them and recatch them. And once we recaught them in those source streams, we would take all of those same measurements and sample for disease again before we moved them. We did have to drive the Hellbenders to their new translocation streams. So this is how we did it. We put them inside fish bags, so kind of bigger versions you might get from the pet store. And we filled these bags with water from the stream. And then to make sure that that water stayed cold, we actually put them inside Yeti coolers with ice packs and then put them inside our vehicles. So Yeti coolers are just not only for keeping your drinks cold. Once we got to the translocation streams, we placed the Hellbenders in the stream, still in the fish bag, and changed the water out with new stream water to allow them to adjust. So kind of, again, like you would do if you brought a new fish home. We picked out very specific boulders and rocks in these streams and then released them under there to their new homes. So in total, we moved 5 animals from source stream 1 to translocation stream 1 and 12 Hellbenders from source stream 2 to translocation stream 2. All right, so we don't want to just move these animals there and then never check on them again. We want to make sure that they're surviving and adapting to their new habitat. Remember, I'm also trying to determine how that fungus affects survival during these translocations. So about every 45 days after we translocated them, we tried to recapture as many Hellbenders as we could in those streams to do another health check. We wanted to weigh them to see if they were gaining or losing weight. So obviously weight loss is bad and then weight gain would be good because that means that they are eating and that there's prey available to them in that stream. And again, testing for the chytrid fungus. We did this until about October, until the water just gets too cold for us to be in. So I won't get into all the boring details about how we test for that fungus in the lab, but basically those swabs, we take the DNA out of them, run it through a machine, and it tells us whether or not that fungus is there and how much of it is there. All right, so that was just better visualization of our project. But so let's get into some results. What did we actually find from this? Was it successful? How many survived? Did any Hellbenders die from chytrid fungus? Let's get into some general results here. So first I'll talk about the disease part of these results. So if you'll remember, we started off with 30 Hellbenders between both of our source streams. Out of these 30 Hellbenders, 16 tested positive for that chytrid fungus, but none of them actually died from the disease, and none of them showed any of those symptoms of actually having chytridiomycosis. So what this means is that even though they test positive for BD, they aren't really getting sick from it. And then after we translocated them and again tested for BD, we actually found a decrease in prevalence. So no Hellbenders tested positive for BD in our first translocation stream, and only one did in the second one, which was really, really great to see. So basically what we found from these results is that this fungus doesn't really seem to play a big role. It might be a minor issue in Hellbender translocations, at least in Eastern Tennessee. However, it's still really important to monitor for this fungus in case an outbreak happens so that you can take action to mitigate the effects of the disease. Okay, so now some general survival results post-translocation. In our first translocation stream, we had 100% survival. So 5 out of the 5 Hellbenders that we moved there survived, which was really, really awesome. Even better, each time we recaptured them with this stream to monitor their health, most Hellbenders were consistently gaining weight. That was also great to see because that means they had plenty of prey to eat and were all healthy and happy. As you can see, this one right here, she's definitely getting a little bit chunky, adjusting to her new home quite well. Now, although none of our Hellbenders died from chytrid or in our first stream, we did have some, unfortunately, some deaths due to other causes, and this was mainly an issue in our second translocation stream. So from this picture here, yes, it was otters. Those cute little mammals can actually be pretty vicious. We think otters ate around 7 of our Hellbenders in our second translocation stream, which was a huge bummer. The reason that we think this is because we did see them around the areas where our Hellbenders were located. A couple of times we found just the transmitters kind of next to a pile of bones right by those otter dens. And then we actually did find a Hellbender with a bite mark in it in the middle of the stream. So we think that came from an otter. So definitely lesson learned big time. Serving for otters and other predators is definitely crucial before conducting a Hellbender translocation. Otherwise, you might end up with some pretty high rates of mortality from these sneaky little otters. But this is one of the most exciting parts of our whole project. Right around April of 2020, my lab mate went out a few last times to track the Hellbenders before those batteries and the transmitter died, and he found a baby Hellbender, which was super exciting, like just the most awesome thing. We can't confirm 100% that it was from the Hellbenders that we introduced there, but it's a sign that there's potentially breeding happening in that stream, which is exactly what we wanted. So again, super exciting. It made all the effort that went into this project worth it. So overall, there were a lot of successes and also some failures with this project. We did successfully translocate Hellbenders and saw some signs of potential breeding in their new streams, which is great. We also didn't have any issues with disease or any deaths due to that fungal pathogen, so another great thing. However, definitely a huge oversight not including otter surveys before we translocated them. But at the end of the day, we were on the ground doing real life conservation and collecting really important data for an endangered species to hopefully restore those populations. So all of this is really helpful to other researchers and organizations, and they can use results from our study to improve upon any future Hellbender translocations. Okay, so that was just one personal example of what researchers are doing to try to conserve and save a declining species. But I have a little bit more time, so I just want to make this relevant to more New York State and what's going on here with the Hellbender. What are the organizations here doing? So, like I did mention, in New York State, we do have Hellbenders in the Allegheny and Susquehanna River watersheds. But much like everywhere else, Hellbenders here are declining, but there is a lot of conservation work and research going on in New York State as well. So there are a lot of partnerships that happen in the state between zoos, universities, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and other federal agencies. So, for example, the Buffalo Zoo and the Bronx Zoo have a Hellbender rearing program. And so what that means is that they hatch and they raise Hellbenders from eggs until they're ready to be released into the wild, which is usually around 5 to 7 years of age, because at that point they reach sexual maturity and they are able to breed in their new streams. And this also gives the eggs and larvae a better chance of surviving, because likely most of them wouldn't have made it in the wild. So some of the work that these agencies are doing here in New York State also includes putting transmitters into Hellbenders and releasing them just like we did in Tennessee, tracking their movements and survivals. So we're getting a lot of good data from the programs going on here as well. Okay, so even though I really love Hellbenders and amphibians in general, some of you still might be wondering, why should you care about them? Why does it matter? So I kind of want to leave you all with this. So first, we can talk about the extrinsic value of amphibians. So what's the economic value, or what does an organism provide to human use? I personally don't like to think of wildlife this way, but unfortunately, many people do, and it could be a main reason or argument for why we should take care of them. So for hellbenders and amphibians in general, an extrinsic value could be that they can sometimes be used as indicators of good environmental quality and health, because amphibians are in direct contact with their environment, and whether it be land or water, and they rely on their skin again for daily essential functions. That's in direct contact with their environment. So if you start to see hellbenders disappear or other amphibians disappear, it might be an indicator that something else is going on in that environment, something is wrong, that's pollution, something along those lines. So we can use them kind of as an indicator for that. Second, many amphibians out there are one of the best pest controls we have in nature. So definitely thank your local frog for helping you take care of those mosquitoes in your backyard. And then lastly, there are a lot of potential medical benefits and research going into amphibians because some of them produce toxins or substances that are being used in medical research. Now for me, what's more important is their intrinsic value, so the value they have just for existing on this planet. These are species that have been here long before we were, and they have every right to continue to be here and be part of this earth. So just because maybe it doesn't provide direct value to humans doesn't mean we shouldn't care about them. We should continue to protect them and conserve these species simply because they are here and they deserve it. So to wrap it up with this last slide, what can you do to help hellbenders? Because hopefully I've convinced everyone like how awesome they are and how we need to protect them. So I think that my number one thing, if you couldn't guess it, is respect their habitat. And this means no rock stacking. It also means no littering ever, but especially around streams and waterways. It's really sad to walk up to some of these hellbender streams and just see it with a lot of garbage in it. It's not good for hellbenders, and it's definitely not good for any other wildlife. Education is also really important. So now all of you know what a hellbender is. You can tell everyone how cool they are and then get the others to love them too. If you happen to see one in the wild, another thing you can do, if you're fishing and you accidentally catch one or happen to see one out in the open, which is rare, but just in case you do, definitely take a picture of it, send it to your local conservation office. Don't bombard them with every single picture of a salamander that you find, but if you really think it's a hellbender, it's really helpful for them to know like what streams they're in. So it can be a useful tool. You can do some of your own research. So helpthehellbender.org is a really great resource through Purdue University. They have some fun games, some coloring sheets, just fun facts about hellbenders. You should definitely check that out. And then lastly, why not consider a job in wildlife conservation? What better way to conserve and protect species that you care about and hellbenders than getting right into it, doing the research yourself. So I definitely have a lot of people that I need to thank to help with this project and all of this help and our knowledge. So everyone that was on my committee for my master's research, all of my lab mates, everyone that helped in the field, in the lab, had a lot of funding from various sources, but all of this definitely wouldn't have been possible without them. So with that, I will leave my email up here if you guys want to write it down. Reach out to me if you have any questions about hellbenders, or again, if you want to get into wildlife, this field. I really want to be an open book for all you guys that are interested in this. So thank you. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Emily. The Hellbender has my heart. I really, they're awesome. Okay, so I have some questions in the Q&A. I'll just read them aloud to you.
Sure, yeah.
Are eggs fertilized by multiple males?
I think it's usually just one male because they will, once they get there, they kind of stay there. Unless another male gets to it, I think it's just going to be the one male that gets to it.
Okay. Do they have teeth?
They do. They're tiny little teeth, but they are sharp. They can draw blood if they bite hard enough.
Have you gotten bit by one?
I've never gotten bit, but my lab mate Brad, we construct these things. They're called Hellbender boxes, and it's kind of a way to create habitat. So it's this kind of like metal thing that you can, or cement block you can put in there to serve as habitat. And he put his finger inside of one, and the Hellbender chomped down right on it. So, yeah.
Poor Brad. Okay. Okay. I know in Missouri, Jeff Brigler with the Missouri Department of Conservation has led an effort to develop nest boxes to help alleviate the loss of interstitial spaces for breeding. Do you know if this has been used with Eastern Hellbenders?
Yeah,
so habitat loss.
Yeah, that's a method that's kind of being used with a lot of states. They're called like nest boxes, bender boxes. Yeah, they do look like these kind of cement tubes that you can put, and it's kind of mixed results, I guess, if they work or not. It's been used in a lot of places. You really just have to get it in a good spot in the stream, because if the water gets too flowy, like they get washed away, and they have to be maintained because they do get like a lot of silt in them. But they are having some success with them in other places. So yeah, it has been used in other areas.
All right. Are the Adirondacks too cold for the Hellbenders?
I don't know. I don't think they ever were historically that far north. It's possible they could have been, but currently there's none there. I mean, it might be too far north for them, but yeah.
Okay. What were movements like following release? How far did they move? Any trends more upstream or downstream?
Yeah, so the movement part of the project was more my lab mate's part, but from his results, what he found was basically it varied by the translocation stream. So our first site, typically those Hellbenders liked where we released them. They kind of stayed in those same rocks for the most part. And then the second stream was a bit of a different story, where the Hellbenders made a lot of larger movements, and it had a lot to do with habitat characteristics. But for the most part, it just kind of like varied by which stream that they were in. It was kind of a mixed bag with that.
Are Hellbender genetics as crazy as some other salamanders?
I don't think they're as crazy as some other salamanders. There's a lot going on. I know there's the Tennessee River Basin, the Ohio River Basin. I think those are separate genetics, and then within each state, there's a little bit of something else going on. I'm not a genetics expert on that part, but there is like a little bit more to the story than just two subspecies.
Have Hellbenders ever been present in the Finger Lakes? Is there an effort to expand their territory or just to support the populations in the two watersheds?
Sure. I don't think they've ever been found in the Finger Lakes. I think just those two watersheds I've shown on the map there. So we wouldn't put them in places where they have never been found historically. We would only want to translocate them to streams or areas where we know that there was a population there for sure, and now the population is gone. So we wouldn't put them somewhere where they were never found.
All right. I also want to say that people are saying thank you and terrific and great work. So just wanted to let you know that.
Cool.
Hello, my name is Noah Gears. I am a student at FLCC and I am interested in working with the DEC. Do you know if there are any opportunities to jump on, such as drive-bys that you know of?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice for people who want to get involved with Hellbenders is reach out to do some research online, like for universities by you that might have any students who are doing Hellbender research. It's always helpful to have volunteers in the field. So I would look into if there's any labs in your area that are doing Hellbender stuff. And then also with the DEC, I don't know if they take on volunteers as much as like a student would, but you can always call like your local DEC office and see what they have going on. They might have an opportunity for people to get out there. So
Cool. Somebody asked about the salamanders, if they've been migrating here yet.
I think
yes, they have.
Yeah, I think last night and then Friday they're saying it's supposed to be really good. So definitely go looking and save them from the cars, please.
Yes, I did see some fatalities early this morning across from Mueller.
Oh, sad.
But I'm hoping the big migration Friday and we get enough volunteers.
Yeah.
So yeah, just looking for some more questions.
Sure.
I think I covered all of them right now.
Awesome.
Somebody said in Binghamton, they had a big migration last night. It's such a cool time of year. We were just talking about this.
Yeah, if you definitely like want to see some that you wouldn't see, like spotted salamanders and four toads, those are usually kind of rare, and it's a good time to see them now. So
yes, Jeffersons. Let's see. Yeah, just a bunch of thank yous. Everybody saying thank you. So thank you very much. I think we're gonna end it. For the people that are still watching, we do have our Speaking of Nature scheduled for April 20th that's next month, April, at 6 p.m. and it's going to be on the spotted lanternfly. So if you're interested in that, please register for that event. And thank you very much, Emily. That was really cool. I can't wait to see one in person. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I hope
You
it
never
does.
know. Yeah, thank you again for letting me speak. I had a great time.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Thank you.